Drake is just about the biggest artist out right now. The man can print charting singles, but his albums have been a different story. Ever since If You're Reading This, It's Too Late 3 albums ago, each one has seemed more bloated than the last. His 2021 release, Certified Lover Boy, is no different. This thing does not need to be an hour and a half long, but that doesn't mean there aren't a few good tracks here. I liked Fair Trade and 7am on Bridle Path, two tracks that use samples, which basically means that a sound from somewhere else, usually another song, plays an important part in the beat. Since I liked these two tracks, I figured they would be a good entry point into figuring out how samples are used on this album. What kind of samples are used, how they're changed, that kind of stuff. I tried to recreate these two tracks, at least get as close as I could, and then use these new sounds and ideas to make an instrumental that would fit on this album. So let me show you what I did, and maybe we can learn something about the samples on Drake's Certified Lover Boy. I started with the Drake and Travis Scott collaboration, Fair Trade. It has production from Travis Scott, Wonder Girl, who's a longtime Travis Scott collaborator, OZ, who produced on the last Drake and Travis Scott collaboration, Sicko Mode, Jahan Sweet, who produced on Drake's last album, Scorpion, and Patron, who seems to be just breaking out.
Yeah. Hey, feeling young, but they treat me like the OG, and they want the T on me, I swear these bitches nosy.
The sample here was that woman singing at the beginning. It gets dropped in the first verse, but we can get a good look when it comes back in the chorus.
Rolling on outside, 29, G5, Seaside, I've been losing friends and finding peace.
I looked up the sample and Wikipedia says it's Mountains by Charlotte Day Wilson. It sounds like the right track, but needs some pretty big changes to match what's going on in this Drake song. First, the original sample has some pretty typical female vocals, but they sound different in Fair Trade, and it's hard to say how exactly they're different.
G5, Seaside, I've been losing friends and finding peace.
To start getting the sample sounding kind of close, I added some effects. I put it in mono so the left and right sides were the same, and I matched the heavy filtering by cutting out high and low frequencies. Then added some reverb that almost makes it sound like it's in a small tiled bathroom. Next, I tried working on the vocal itself. I pitched the whole thing up an octave, hoping to get the right chipmunk sound, but it still seemed kinda thin. I layered this new vocal with the original one and ended up with something that seemed about as close as I was gonna get.
G5, Seaside, I've been losing friends and finding peace. But honestly, that sound like a fair trade to me.
It's not an exact match, you can still hear that some of the pronunciations between the two are different, but who knows what kind of vocal effects were used here. With the sample remade, we've got the important thing done here, so let's just skate through the rest of what I did to round out the instrumental. First, there were the synths that sit around the sample. Listen to the track and see if you can guess what they're playing here.
Rolling on outside, 29, G5, Seaside.
Paying attention to these synths, it seems like a hard part to remake. The notes sound like they get louder the longer they're held, and if I had to guess, the producer played some kind of synth line and then reversed it. To get around this, I made a synth that was already reversed, starting quiet and then getting louder. With the sound, I did my best to match the 4 different chords going on here.
G5, Seaside, I've been losing friends and finding peace. But honestly, that sound like a fair trade to me.
Underneath the synths is a bass that pretty much just seems to hold out notes that match the chords. I was able to get something pretty quickly working with a saw wave and Serum.
G5, Seaside, I've been losing friends and finding peace. But honestly, that sound like a fair trade to me.
That's everything I did to remake this instrumental. There's no drums in this part of the song, so what can we learn about sampling here? The producers found a track to sample that had a female vocal and subdued instrumental. They gave it some heavy filtering and strange vocal effects, then put it in the background, surrounded by some synths and a bass.
G5, Seaside, I've been losing friends and finding peace. But honestly, that sound like a fair trade to me.
After Fair Trade, I tried to remake 7am on Bridle Path, the time and place track that shows up on every Drake album. This one's produced by Cardo Got Wings, who worked on the Drake smash God's Plan, and Des Wright, who worked on Wants and Needs from Drake's last EP, Scary Hours 2.
Look, I wish everyone could tell me exactly what they need from me. The first second they speak to me, I'm not with all the secrecy secretly beefing me.
All that cheering going on in the background, that's the sample. I was able to find what seems like the source, a clip of the Philip O'Beary varsity cheerleaders during a cheer battle. The original video is 22 minutes long, and someone watched 15 minutes of it to find the sample. Comparing it to that Drake track, it already sounds pretty close. All I have to do is maybe slow it down a bit.
Second they speak to me, I'm not with all the secrecy, secretly beefing me behind closed doors, but playing it peacefully for the streets to see.
It didn't take very long to get the sample pretty close here, so let's go through the rest of the things I did to remake this beat. First, I looked at the strings that surround the sample. Since this cheer battle is mostly yelling, clapping, and stomping, there's not really a melody here. That could work for a track. Drake's last album had Non-Stop, which was just drums and bass.
This a rolling, not a stop, watch shit don't never stop. This the flow that got the block hot, shit got super hot.
I'd say that's the exception though. Most Drake tracks have some sort of melody to match his melodic rapping. Here the producers add some kind of melody with some strings around the sample, like those synths we looked at in Fair Trade. I was able to find a pretty close sound with the default violins in FL Studio's Flex. I just needed to add some reverb and filtering and then lay down chords that sounded similar.
Exactly what they need from me. The first second they speak to me, I'm not with all the secrecy, secretly beefing me behind closed doors, but playing it peacefully for the streets to see.
Underneath the strings is a synth bass that pretty much follows the same chords. I remade it in the synth Serum, starting with a heavily filtered saw wave to capture most of the low-key sound. After that, I just added the sort of plucked sound at the beginning along with some chorusing to make it wider.
Tell me exactly what they need from me. The first second they speak to me, I'm not with all the secrecy, secretly beefing me behind closed doors, but playing it peacefully for the streets to see.
Those cheerleaders aren't the only vocals in the background of this track. There's another quieter sample that sounds like someone singing through underwater auto-tune. I tried my best to recreate it and then covered my voice in heavy filtering and auto-tune to match the sound and also hide how bad it was.
Everyone can tell me exactly what they need from me. The first second they speak to me, I'm not with all the secrecy, secretly beefing me behind closed doors, but playing it peacefully for the streets to see.
The drums in this track are sparse. With the cheerleaders doing all that clapping and stomping, it doesn't need much else. There's a snare with some reverb and some heavily filtered toms to add a little bounce.
Tell me exactly what they need from me. The first second they speak to me, I'm not with all the secrecy, secretly beefing me behind closed doors, but playing it peacefully for the streets to see.
That's pretty much everything I did to remake 7 AM on Bridle Path. So what's going on with the sample here? The cheer squad brings some female vocals along with a bit of rhythm and all that clapping and stomping. It didn't seem to have many effects applied, maybe just the slightest speed change and a bit of filtering. Since the sample has just about no melody, it's surrounded by some strings and bass. The percussion is a little more subdued, seeming to just be a snare and some toms. The first second they speak to me, I'm not with all the secrecy, secretly beefing me behind closed doors, but playing it peacefully for the streets to see. After remaking both of these tracks from Certified Lover Boy, I figured I would test out these sounds and ideas by making a new instrumental that would fit on this album. The first thing to do, and probably the hardest, was to find a sample. Both of these tracks use something with a female vocal and a bit of rhythm. It's a pretty broad description to find a sample, so I just cheated and looked for another song from the singer on Fair Trade. I searched for Charlotte Day Wilson, and the first thing I found seemed like a good enough starting point. After grabbing this track, titled Strangers, I added some heavy filtering similar to the sample on Fair Trade. Like that track, I also layered in an octave higher duplicate to help the vocals sound more interesting. After putting the sample in mono and adding all of that filtering, I wanted to bring in some synths to help give the track some width. I figured just holding out some chords would balance out all of the movement in the vocal. I grabbed the synth from Fair Trade and played some chords that sounded good with all of these sung notes. Next, I added a bass, using the one from 7 AM on Bridle Path. I played a note that matched the chords and added a little bit of motion at the ends of the phrases. Finally, I added some drums. I wanted to keep them simple, like the drums from 7 AM on Bridle Path. And the sample has the slightest bit of percussion with that constant piano. So I just added the snare from that song along with a hi-hat. And that's everything I added to this beat. The only thing left is to see how Drake would fit on it. So I grabbed a terrible acapella and messed around until it fit.
Hey,
Feeling young, but they treat me like the OG. And they want a team with me, I swear these bitches nosy. Said he put some money on my head, I guess we gon' see. I won't put no money on it, said my niggas owe me.
That covers How I Remade, Fair Trade, and 7am on Bridal Path from Certified Lover Boy, as well as the beat I made with these sounds and ideas from these tracks. We saw samples that had female vocals paired with some rhythm, how they were thinned and then surrounded with synth basses and some sparse drums. Hopefully you can use these ideas when trying to sample in your own music, or just listen to this album a little differently. Thanks for listening. Leave a comment and let me know what you think about Drake's Certified Lover Boy. In the description, you can find a link to download the samples and presets I used in this video. Make sure to subscribe to Sound Selection on YouTube, check out the podcast, and follow on Instagram.